negotiators are extremely complex.
So one of the reasons why it's very difficult to move the United States forward on this is basically the institutional structure that's built into our constitutional system. When you're thinking about what it's going to take to get the United States back to the table, you have to think about 67 votes in the Senate. Any other line of negotiation, any other line of argument is not going to get you back to where the United States is going to be able to ratify and implement and participate in an international agreement. And besides that magic number 67, there's another number to remember about the Senate, one we live with every single day. You need 60 votes to stop talking. Okay? And in the Senate, that's very hard to find 60 votes to stop talking. You need 60 votes to actually move to take action on legislation. So unless and until you have 60 votes, you're not even going to raise something such as domestic climate change legislation. Without 67 votes, you're not going to be able to ratify an international treaty. Again, very high levels of consensus are needed. You need to have a lot of the political stars aligned. If we don't engage internationally, we're not going to be able to make the climate change policies internationally work, and we're not going to be able to protect ourselves from competition from emitting countries unless we get them into the game. So the question for the United States is how to get back into the game. Part of that is going to be seeing progress from other countries that will give us the space politically at home. It's very much a heavy lift right now in the United States to convince people that China and India and other developing nations are actually moving forward in ways that could be credited in an international climate change system. And unless and until they can make those the actions they're already taking credible and creditable under an international system, it's going to be very hard for the United States to tell our population that's not going to, it won't harm us to move into the international arena.
Participation of developing countries is obviously vital in a post-2012 regime. We've all seen the figures. China is probably now the largest single emitter of CO2. India and others are not that far behind. Certainly in 20 years' time, they won't be far behind. Now, I've got 6, 7 suggestions. The first is that we have to keep this issue on the agenda of heads of government and senior economic ministers. For too long, this issue has been the purview of environment ministers, who are often rather junior politically, to make an understatement. The UN summit, the APEC and G8 meetings are interesting signals that leaders recognize that climate change is perhaps the principal economic challenge facing governments today, and that integrating environmental concerns into the economic decision-making process is only going to get done from the top down. Secondly, we have to remember, and I don't think most people realize this, that at the end of the day, Kyoto is primarily an investment agreement. The IEA has estimated a figure of $20 trillion, Elliot mentioned that at the beginning, in new investments in the energy sector. This represents a tremendous opportunity to turn much of this investment into clean energy investments. And much of this is not very complicated. For example, turning much of the investment, Chinese investment in coal-fired power plants into investments in supercritical installations would save an enormous amount of greenhouse gases. Chinese power plants operated at the average Japanese efficiency level. China would consume 20% less coal, avoiding 486 metric tons of CO2 emitted. And there are many similar savings. I keep thinking that a major program of energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage, and renewable energy investments would have enormous political appeal in most developed countries and would help bring the more powerful developing countries to the bargaining table. This needs really serious leadership at the highest level, but I can't imagine a subject that would bring George W. Bush and Hu Jintao around the same table other than how do we deal with coal-fired electricity and reducing the CO2 emissions dramatically. Thirdly, we really have to come to grips with sinks. About 25% of emissions now come from forest clearance. There are few international incentives for development policies which avoid deforestation. Fourth, we need to align the trade regime along with the development regime with progress towards sustainable development, a major part of which is action on climate change. The fifth one is adaptation. We had an interesting session on adaptation this morning. But the IPCC reports, the recent UNEP report, which we launched in Ottawa yesterday, and simple observations in the Canadian Arctic have persuaded even the doubters that the effects of climate change are already being felt and that adaptation measures are urgently needed. Sixth, I turn to the role of the carbon markets and the reform of the clean development mechanism, a very controversial mechanism which essentially rewards investors for investing in projects in developing countries which reduce emissions. The CDM has real problems. Many of us know what they are. We call this a development dividend to indicate that we're not just looking to reform the front end of the mechanism with its high transaction costs, which are very frustrating to investors, but also the development end of the equation. We've come to the rather obvious conclusion that the CDM needs a programmatic window. Elliot mentioned this, in which countries will receive credits for actually implementing programs across a spectrum of activities rather than just the project-based mechanism which we now have. So the time is right to begin to take some serious action, and I hope we don't get trapped in the old logic of the COP process, which is if you can remove 7 or 8 commas and a few square brackets from one meeting to the next, you can put out the flags and open the champagne. I think we really are at the stage where we need to make some significant breakthroughs in this area. I don't think the breakthroughs are unknown. It isn't the black arts. You saw the graphs that were being put up from McKinsey earlier on. The technologies are known. What we have to do is organize ourselves to do it. Thank you very much.